In this video lesson, we're going to have a look at the various panels in the Camera Raw editor to give you an overview of what each one does. And we can kick off with the basic panel here, which is your photo fixing panel. It tweaks colors and tones to overcome problems with the camera settings, for example. So you could claw back, highlight detail by dragging the slider to the left and lighten up the shadows using this slider here. You can also make tonal adjustments in this panel here. So if we click on the Tone Curve tab, you can see we've got a curve that we can work with, and you can use these sliders here to selectively target problem areas. Let's lighten up the shadows, and you can see it's pushing the shadows up at the bottom left of the curve. And then we can also darken the highlights by dragging this slider to the left, and it's dipping the curve down at the top here to darken the shot's original highlight information. You can also go to Point Curve and either use presets such as medium contrast, for example, and that's pushing up the highlights, darkening the shadows, or you could drag these manually to darken the highlights a little bit more by pulling that down like so. Next up, we have the handy Detail tab. Now by default, Photoshop is sharpening the photographs a little bit anyway, as you can see here with a value of 25, and you need to view the shot at 100% to see if it's really being sharpened correctly or not. So let me just have a look at some of these rocks here, and you can see that if we increase the amount, then we get more delicate detail popping out from these rocks like so. And the Detail tab also enables you to remove noise from the shot, such as color or luminance noise. Next up, we have the HSL Grayscale tab, and that enables you to change hue, saturation or luminance values. So you could go to the blues, for example, and increase the saturation of those, or create more vibrant looking grass by increasing the saturation of the yellows, for example. Alternatively, you could click Convert to Grayscale and then use these sliders to lighten or darken tones based on the shot's original color. So if we want to darken the blues, that makes them go darker like so, and that makes the lighter clouds pop out more effectively. And this panel works in conjunction with the next one, which is the split toning panel. So once you've got a black and white shot such as this one, you can push up the saturation value a little bit for the hue in the shadows and the highlights, and then change the hue to create different tints for the brightest highlights and for the darkest shadows. So let me just change the hue for the shadows to make it greener, and let's go for something warmer for the highlights. So you've got a nice contrast there in your split toned version of the monochrome image. And you can change the balance as well between the shadows or the colors in the highlights like so. I'm just going to go back to here and turn off Convert to Grayscale. I'm just going to get rid of my split toning just to show you what those can do, but I don't want to actually do that to my shot at this stage. Next up, we have this one here, which is lens corrections. And if you enable lens profile corrections, you can tell Photoshop which camera you are using. It will then look at the metadata, work out what lens you've got, and counteract any lens distortion produced by that particular lens. And you can also adjust things manually as well by ticking here to remove any color fringing. In fact, that's probably worth having a look at here, because if you go to 100%, you'll notice that there's a little bit of purple fringing there caused by chromatic aberration. If I click here, that reduces the fringing. So that's a really handy way of getting rid of color fringes, and you can fine tune it by dragging this slider if need be. And let's go to manual, and you can also counteract geometric distortion with various photographs, especially with architectural shots, by either using these sliders here, or you can use these presets to counteract a variety of different types of geometric distortion. Some target horizontal distortion, others target vertical distortion, and some are a compromise between the two. So it depends on the problems of your image, and it's worth experimenting with these sliders to try and get rid of distortion without producing too many transparent edges around your frame. Continuing our overview, we can go to the effects panel here, and here you can add effects, especially to black and white conversions where you might want to put lots of grain into the image, change its size and roughness to create a film grain effect. And you can also add a vignette to the shot as well to darken the edges in a dramatic way. And the nice thing here, it's post-crop vignetting, so even if you've cropped the composition, it's still going to preserve the vignetted corners in the new version of the shot. Moving on, we've got the camera calibration panel, and that does a similar job to settings in the camera. You can change profiles to faithful, for example, for less saturated colors, or landscape, which should boost the blues a little bit and the greens as well, as we can see here. That's added a bit of clipping. And you can also experiment with something a little bit more neutral and tweak the colors and tones manually in Photoshop. And you can also change the way the processing works. If we go to the processing for the current version and go back in time to 2010, let's pop back up to the basic panel now, and you'll notice that the sliders have changed to the older sliders of recovery and fill light instead of the highlight slider that we have in the modern version. And the shadows slider has disappeared now, and we've now got fill light instead. But let's go back to the future, as it were, and set this back to 2012 so we can see we now have our highlights and shadow sliders. Moving on, we've got this panel here, which is the preset panel, and that enables you to create presets using the basic panel sliders, save those as a preset, and then apply them by clicking like so. This doesn't really apply to this particular shot, but we'll show you how to make presets in another video lesson. So I'm going to press Command Z to undo that. And finally, we've got the snapshots panel, so you can actually record various states of the image by clicking here, labeling as a snapshot. You could then go and make an adjustment by reducing the highlights, for example. Go back to snapshots, click again, label it and click OK. And then you can jump between the snapshots to see which version you prefer. And if you go to the basics panel, it will remember the settings that you used for that particular snapshot.